Some people grow up becoming unusually easy to deal with. They do not ask for much. They do not complain often. They handle their problems quietly, read the room quickly, and make themselves as low maintenance as possible. To other people, this can look like maturity, kindness, or emotional strength. But sometimes those normal habits are not signs that someone had a healthy childhood. They are signs that very early on they learned their needs were inconvenient. A child who is not emotionally noticed does not always know they are being neglected. They simply learn to adjust. They stop expecting comfort. They stop bringing their feelings into the room. They become useful, calm, independent, and agreeable because those were the safest ways to exist. And years later, the world may praise the very traits that were built around a quiet absence. So the question is not just what habits you have, it is what those habits were protecting you from. Because childhood neglect does not always create a person who looks visibly wounded. Sometimes it creates someone capable, reliable, polite, responsible, someone who seems to have everything under control, someone who knows how to read a room, carry everyone else's emotions, avoid being a problem, and survive without asking for much. But beneath that calm surface, there may be a quieter story. A story about a child who slowly learned that their inner world was not going to be met. Not attacked necessarily, not always rejected in dramatic ways, just not met. No one asked what they were feeling. No one helped them name the heaviness in their chest. No one noticed the small changes in their voice. No one came closer when they went quiet. And because nothing obvious happened, they may have spent years believing nothing was wrong. That is one of the most confusing things about emotional neglect. It is not always remembered as an event, it is remembered as an atmosphere, a lack of warmth, a lack of response, a lack of someone turning towards you with genuine curiosity and saying, what is happening inside you? And when a child grows up in that kind of emotional silence, they do not usually decide consciously to become guarded. They simply adapt to the rules of the room. They learn what gets ignored. They learn what creates tension. They learn what makes adults withdraw. And eventually, they begin to shape themselves around what is safest. One of the first things they often learn is to stop asking. Not all at once, it begins in small moments. A child reaches for comfort and receives distraction. They cry, and the room becomes uncomfortable. They ask for help, and someone sighs. They try to explain a feeling, and the feeling is minimized, corrected, or brushed aside. After enough of these moments, the child's nervous system begins to understand something the mind may never put into words. Reaching out is risky. Needing someone is dangerous. Hope can become humiliating when it keeps meeting an empty room. So the child begins to build a life around not needing. And later, as an adult, this may look like independence. They handle sickness alone, they manage stress alone, they go through heartbreak and still show up to work. They do not tell people when they are struggling until the crisis is already passed. When someone offers help, they say, it's okay, I've got it. And maybe they do have it. But having it was never the whole story. The deeper question is why being helped feels so uncomfortable. Why receiving support feels like losing control. Why depending on someone feels less like connection and more like standing on the edge of a cliff. Because for some people, independence is not freedom, it is protection. It is the quiet logic of a child who learned, if I do not need anyone, no one can disappoint me by not showing up. You did not become independent because needing people was unnecessary. You became independent because needing people once felt unsafe. And once that belief becomes part of your inner architecture, it does not stay in one place, it spreads. It begins to shape how you feel, how you speak, how you choose, how you love, and how much of yourself you allow to exist around other people. This is why many people who grew up emotionally unseen struggle not only with asking for help, but with knowing what they feel at all. Someone asks, how do you feel about this? And for a moment, something inside you goes blank. Not because you are hiding, not because you are trying to be difficult, but because there is no clear answer within reach. You can describe what happened. You can explain what makes sense. You can analyze the situation from 10 different angles. But when it comes to the actual feeling, the living thing inside the body, the words disappear. This is not a lack of intelligence. It is often a lack of emotional mirroring. Children do not learn their inner world in isolation. They learn it through being reflected. A parent sees a child's tears and says, that hurt your feelings. A parent notices the clenched fists and says, you seem angry. A parent hears the silence and says, something feels heavy today. These moments do more than comfort the child. They give the child a map. They teach the child that feelings are real, nameable, survivable, and allowed. But when that mirroring is absent, the child is left alone with sensations they cannot organize. Sadness becomes tiredness, anger becomes guilt, fear becomes overthinking, need becomes shame, and eventually the safest thing may be to turn the volume down on the whole inner world. Not because the feelings are gone, but because feeling them never led to care. So the adult may move through life with a strange distance from themselves. They may know when other people are upset before those people say a word, but not notice their own resentment until they are exhausted. They may feel pressure in the chest, tightness in the jaw, heaviness in the stomach, but not know whether they are sad, angry, lonely, afraid, or simply done. They may look at other people who seem connected to their desires, passions, and grief and wonder how they got access to that part of being human. When no one helps a child understand their feelings, the child may survive by becoming a stranger to themselves. And once you are a stranger to yourself, even simple choices can begin to feel complicated. What do you want to eat? I don't care. What movie do you want to watch? Whatever you want. Where do you want to go? I'm good with anything. People may call this easygoing, flexible, relaxed, but sometimes I don't care is not peace. Sometimes it is a reflex, a learned disappearance, because having a preference once felt inconvenient. Maybe your wants were ignored. Maybe they were mocked. Maybe they created tension. Maybe the adults around you were too overwhelmed to make room for anything that did not serve their mood, their schedule, or their comfort. So you learn to scan the room before scanning yourself. You learn to ask, what answer will keep this calm? What answer will make me easier? What answer will not create disappointment? Over time, the distance between you and your own preference becomes so familiar that you mistake it for personality. You do not feel like someone who is suppressing a want. You feel like someone who does not have one. But the want did not disappear because it was unimportant. It went underground because at some point wanting openly did not feel safe. Being easygoing can become a quiet way of abandoning yourself before anyone else can. And that abandonment often shows up in the way you apologize, not just when you make a mistake, but when you take too long to reply, when you ask a question, when someone bumps into you, when your needs interrupt the smoothness of someone else's day. You say sorry before you even know what you are sorry for. You explain why you are tired, why you need rest, why you cannot come, why you chose that. You feel this, why you are allowed to be where you are. It can look like politeness, it can sound like consideration, but beneath it, there may be a much older fear, the fear that your presence requires justification, the fear that if you take up space without explaining yourself, someone will decide you are too much. So you build a case for your own existence before anyone puts you on trial. You do not simply say, I can't. You provide the full history of why you can't. You do not simply say, I prefer this. You soften it until it almost disappears. You do not simply need something. You make sure the need arrives wrapped in apology. This is not just a communication habit, it is a wound in the shape of a sentence. Over explaining is often what happens when someone never learned they were allowed to simply be. And if you were not allowed to simply be, you may have become very good at becoming what other people needed instead. You learn to read faces, microshifts in tone, the slight pause before someone answers, the mood of a room before anyone names it. You became skilled at knowing when to speak, when to stay quiet, when to make a joke, when to disappear, when to become softer, brighter, smaller, easier. People may call this emotional intelligence, and sometimes it is. But for many emotionally neglected people, it began as vigilance. When the emotional climate of a home is unpredictable, a child becomes a weather watcher. They study the adults. They track the air. They learn which version of themselves causes the least disturbance. And because their own inner world was not being noticed, they become experts in everyone else's. This is the hidden cost of becoming the mirror. You reflect people so well that they feel understood around you, but afterward, when you are alone, you may not know who you were in the room. You may feel different with every person, not fake exactly, but unencored, as if your personality forms in response to whatever will keep the connection safe. And that raises a quiet, frightening question. If you are always adapting to the room, who are you when no one else is there? You became good at reading the room because no one was reading you. And when no one reads you long enough, usefulness can start to feel like love. This is where many people become the helper, the fixer, the therapist friend, the one who can hold everyone else's pain with remarkable patience. They remember birthdays, they check in, they listen deeply, they stay calm in other people's storms. They know how to be needed. But when their own life starts to fall apart, they vanish. They do not call. They do not ask to be held. They do not want to become the weight in someone else's hands because somewhere along the way they learned that being useful was safer than being vulnerable. If you could make yourself helpful, maybe you could earn closeness. If you could support everyone else, maybe no one would notice how much support you needed. If you could be indispensable, maybe you would not be abandoned. This creates a painful kind of love, a love where you are wanted for what you provide, but not necessarily known for who you are. A love where people come to you, but you do not feel allowed to come undone in front of them. A love where receiving care feels suspicious, like a debt, like a trap, like something that will eventually be used to prove you needed too much. And so you keep giving, not always because you want to, sometimes because rest feels like becoming useless. And if usefulness became your way of being loved, rest will feel like disappearing. This is why conflict can feel so threatening, not because you are weak, not because you are too sensitive, not because you simply dislike drama, but because for some people, disagreement does not feel like two adults working through difference. It feels like the beginning of emotional exile. You say it's fine when it is not fine. You swallow the boundary, you soften the truth, you make yourself agreeable before anyone has a chance to withdraw. Because in an emotionally neglectful environment, affection may have felt scarce and unstable. A small disagreement could change the temperature of the entire house. A parent's silence could feel endless. A cold mood could become the whole world. And when a child depends on the very people who are emotionally unavailable, even a little distance can feel dangerous. So the child learns to protect connection at any cost, even at the cost of honesty, even at the cost of self respect, even at the cost of not knowing where they end and where other people begin. Then years later, a delayed text message can feel like abandonment. A quiet partner can feel like punishment. A tense conversation can make the body prepare for loss. For some people, silence does not feel like peace. It feels like love leaving the room. And this is where the whole pattern begins to reveal itself. The independence, the emotional numbness, the constant apologizing, the inability to choose, the habit of reading everyone else, the need to be useful, the fear of conflict. They are not random flaws. They are not proof that you are broken. They are pieces of an old survival system, a system built by a younger version of you who had to make sense of emotional scarcity, a younger version of you who did not have the power to demand presence, a younger version of you who could not leave the room, name the wound, or explain what was missing. So that child did the only thing a child could do. They adapted. They became smaller, quieter, more capable, less needy, less disruptive, less visible. And in a way, the armor worked. It got you through. It helped you survive places where your emotional life did not have enough room. It protected you from the repeated pain of expecting warmth and meeting absence. But the tragedy of old armor is that it does not know when the war is over. It keeps defending, even when love is trying to reach you. It keeps scanning, even when you are safe. It keeps shrinking you. Even when there is room, it keeps whispering, do not need too much. Do not ask too loudly. Do not trust too quickly. Do not become a burden. And because it once protected you, it can feel like truth. But sometimes what feels like truth is only fear that has had many years to practice its voice. The armor worked. That is why it is so hard to take off. But the same armor that protected you can also keep love from reaching you. So if you recognize yourself in this, the point is not to turn against those parts of you. It is not to shame yourself for being guarded. It is not to force yourself into vulnerability before your body feels ready. Those habits were not foolish. They were intelligent responses to an environment where your needs had nowhere to land. You were not broken by being needy. You were trained to believe your needs were the problem. And there is a difference. A broken person needs to be fixed. A trained person can slowly learn something new.